the webinar. We have a lot of information to go through, but we will be opening up the webinar at the end for questions. If you have any questions, please use the GoToWebinar control panel on the right of your screen. There should be a section titled Questions. You can click there and use this form to submit questions anytime during the presentation. If you have any technical problems during the webinar, please contact Michelle Santiago. I sent an email with her contact information earlier today to everyone that's been registered. But if you did not get that email, Michelle did enter her information in the chat section on the control panel. Today, I'm joined by Deborah Santiago, the Vice President for Policy and COO of Excelencia in Education, and Alex Cho, Vice President of Government Relations for the National Council for Community and Education Partnerships. And now over to Deborah Santiago.
Thanks, Andres. I wanted to give a quick overview as to why we had started Examples of Excelencia 11 years ago. And it's for three main reasons. First, we kept hearing there were people that wanted to figure out how to serve Latinos and didn't know how. And we wanted to bring attention to what's working. And we knew there were good efforts going across the country that were making a difference with evidence of effectiveness. Second, we wanted to make sure there were no excuses for not serving Latinos, and anyone who wanted to know what was going on across the country could find practices and examples of people doing it across the country, making sure that Latinos were amongst those served and that they were doing as well as or better than others. And third, we wanted to create a network of those of common cause who are focused on Latino student success and serving them amongst all students they serve, to make sure they had a place they could go to learn about what others are doing and hopefully connect and learn from others while they're sharing what they're doing. So having said that, wanted to give you a quick overview of the webinar we're having today. I want to focus on, give you a little bit more background examples of Excelencia than I gave you, so you understand a little bit more of the context. And then we want to get straight to the heart of the webinar, which is to help you in figuring out how to tell your story, your program's efforts, and completing a profile as a way of helping to tell your story. And then we want to have a colleague who is on the selection committee share his perspective on his review of the finalists for Examples of Excelencia and decisions and conversations they have in order to select the example. And they want to give you a quick overview of some resources you might want to consider as you think about telling your story and get into some questions and answers.
Great, thanks, Deborah. So as she said, I'll go over the overview examples. So Examples of Excelencia is actually entering its 11th year, and it's the only national effort to recognize programs that use evidence-based practices to accelerate Latino student success. In that time, we've received nominations from over 1,300 programs from 30 states, plus DC and Puerto Rico. Through Examples, we've helped programs use this recognition to leverage funding and support. And we've invested over $2.5 million in programming efforts and sharing. And we also share program success stories through our platforms, through Going Works database, our social media, and other publications. I wanted to talk about real quickly the selection process. It's a three-step process. It's nominations, profile submissions, and selection. Programs are nominated in one of the four categories here: the associate, baccalaureate, graduate, or community-based organizations. Nominations are submitted online at edexcelencia.org/2016, and the deadline for nominations is April 4th. Nominated programs are contacted via email with instructions on submitting their profile, and they also receive the profile completion guide and the list of profile questions that we'll be discussing today. Programs have until April 25th to submit their profile. After the deadline, Excelencia staff will review all the profiles and select a set of finalists. This set of finalists will then be forwarded to an external selection committee where they'll select an example in each one of the four categories. So as I mentioned, the important dates here: nominations will be due April 4th. Profiles are due April 25th. We'll go through the review process of all the profiles between May through early June, and we'll select the finalists and forward them to the selection committee. We're hopefully expecting to have that done by maybe mid-July to early August. And then after that, Examples culminates in Celebración de Excelencia. It's our annual event where we recognize all and finalists. That's on September 21st, Following that, on September 22nd is our Accelerating Latino Student Success Workshop. It's an it's a day-long networking event. That's on September 22nd. And just to go over the different ways we try to recognize finalists and examples, programs that are recognized as examples receive a $5,000 financial contribution. Their profiles included in both the What Work Latinos in Higher Education Compendium and the Growing What Works database. The database is an online searchable database with the programs that we've recognized in the past. We also present examples at Example of Excelencia, and they also, the examples representatives participate in a panel discussion at our last workshop. Travel and hotel will also be covered for the examples representative to attend our fall events. The programs that are selected as finalists will also be included in the compendium in the Growing What Works database, and they'll receive recognition at Celebración and a special discounted registration rate to attend the last workshop.
Great. So let's get to the heart of it, which is telling your story. And I will say part of the challenge you will face is that we have limited real estate, limited space in which to tell your story. And we did that on purpose. You know, there's so many good programs out across the country. And, you know, when we get an opportunity, we want to talk about them at length. But we're trying to bring attention here at the national stage and across the country. And we want people to be succinct in how they tell their story. As we often know, there are competing priorities and there are other issues going on. And it's really important that we're able to be succinct in sharing a little bit of the work we're doing. So for the examples profile that will be submitted after you're nominated, we have 5 components that we ask you to complete as a way of telling your story. And we think it's just enough. It covers the essence of what it is you're doing at your program that can be helpful to somebody who knows nothing about your community, your institution, and the efforts that you're doing, enough so they understand what you're doing and can bring attention to it to others who are thinking about it. So we have the kind of the history and a clear description. We look at staff and budget, goals and mission. We look at evidence of effectiveness. It's absolutely critical, and that is what makes this stand out from other efforts. And we focus on a key set of issue areas that are useful for those who are looking at how to address Latino student success. First, starting with the description and history of the program. You know, and here you will move your eye to the bottom here where we looked at, there's a character limit here of 1,500 characters, and that includes letters and spaces. This is what I was saying before. We really want to push you to be succinct in telling your story, getting to the crux of what it is your program does, and when it was started, why it's important, why is it needed, and you know, we hope you'll cover some of the population you serve in the context of your institution or broader community. It's a way for somebody reading this to quickly understand what it is you're about and why it's important that you do what you do. Just a quick sense of what our reviewers generally look for. And by our reviewers, I mean first the Excelencia staff, but then the selection committee as they take a look at it. And they're looking for a couple of things in this first section of description and history. They're looking to see, you know, what are you actually doing to serve your students? And are you explicit in saying that Latino students are amongst all of those you serve? Now, there is absolutely no requirement that you only serve Latino students, but that you know amongst all you serve something about your Latino population that's being served overall. Then sharing a little bit about why the program came to pass. Why is it important? What's the need that gave impetus to the work that you're doing? And we do take a look at the longevity of the program and how it's been sustainable. In some ways, we're looking for maybe 3 to 5 years of effort at a minimum. In part, it's helpful to infer from this that the program has had some support, institutional and financial and otherwise, or that it's got program staff support, and that it's another way of showing that it has value and need in the community it's serving. And then just once again, looking at what components of the Latino demographic that you're serving are you focused on in your program? And what does that mean in relation to overall the students and the community where you were residing?
Great. So in the second section, staff and budget, what we're asking for you here is to describe the essential staff and their roles. We also ask for you to share an overview of your funding sources and your program's total budget. And so in this section, you have a 900 character limit, including letters and spaces. So what reviewers are generally looking for are the credentials and expertise your program staff and leadership in your program staff and leadership positions. They're looking for sustainability and where the financial support is coming from, and if there are plans for future funding. They're also looking to see if it's scalable and replicable. Are program components being institutionalized, or is the program growing across communities? And based on the cost of a program, can you take components of it and put it in another community or institution to replicate it? The third section, goal and missions, we're asking for you to do just that. Explain the goals you have for the program and the students you serve. Make sure that the goals you set align with the program services and activities, and that everything that you're saying within this section is within the 1,000 character limit. When reviewers are looking at this section, they want to see whether or not the goals that you set are attainable and realistic. They also want to see whether your goals and mission reflects your program description, and if your goals in this section are supported by the evidence of effectiveness section that Deborah's going to discuss now.
Great, thanks. As we said, this is a short character limit, but it really forces us to get to the heart of the program and what's involved in telling your story. This section, evidence of effectiveness, is really a critical part. We often have people tell stories about what it is they're doing, and we find having evidence of effectiveness can set it apart from others that we hear when you're able to track data and quantitative and qualitative. So that's really what we're looking for. We want to make sure that you have a way of explaining how you know your program is actually working for the intended group that you're serving. Often that's through metrics, quantitative and qualitative. We often get a lot of testimonials and survey summaries, and those are valuable, but I will say that having quantitative data helps really augment in telling the story and shows evidence of effectiveness that others can resonate with and understand. And you want to make sure you're bringing attention to your achievement, your leadership, and recognition you've received as evidence that what you're doing with your students is making a significant difference. Here we have a little bit larger character limit of 2,000, but again, it's trying to push us to stay succinct and sharing the most essential information that people can take away. Kinds of things that we're looking for within this category. We're looking at alignment. Does the evidence reflect the program description? Is it consistent with your mission and goals? We are looking, and you'd be surprised how sometimes you're looking at a mission and goals that are broad and aspirational, and then the activities aren't tied to it, and the data aren't tied to that either. So we're looking for alignment in a succinct way. We're looking for metrics. How do you know your program is being successful? Are you tracking it? Is it by students? It could be about enrollment, it could be completion, it could be persistence. There are many categories, but is it authentic to the work you're trying to do? Can you disaggregate your data in some way to show us that you know amongst all your serving how lucky you're performing, and if the intervention you're providing is making a significant difference? Do you have the opportunity to compare the groups you're serving with others? We know that's a little bit harder to do when you're implementing a program. You often are looking to any additional dollars you get, you spend on the students and the effort. So we understand we're not expecting the, such a complicated and rigorous evaluation. We're looking for evidence of effectiveness, but there are lots of tools you can use to do that, especially from programmatic level that you should think about in ways that are authentic to what you're doing. And then we're also looking to see if there's been progress over time. And if you have the ability to show that either grown or evolved in your work, and if others have recognized the efforts that you've done. So I know that was very succinct, but we also want to turn your eyes to thinking about some of the resources where you could turn to find information for your evidence of effectiveness. You know, if you're at an institution of higher education, often there's a office of development or institutional research that might be collecting data on cohorts of students that you're serving. And if you've not thought about reaching out to them, maybe they can help you collect some of the data and the information that you need. Or are there other programs where you are, if you're a CBO, community-based organization? Are there data on other programs in your area that you might be able to refer to? We know we can find information that are publicly available, but a lot of communities and institutions that can help tell the story a little bit more about what you're doing. And we're going to share with you some concrete examples of very practical, pragmatic metrics that anyone can implement. You don't have to be an evaluator to do it, but as a program implementer, you can find ways to make happen. And then at Excelencia, we're trying to improve the technical assistance we provide. So we've put together a completion guide, and there are a whole list of resources there that you might want to consider as you're exploring how to use metrics in telling your story. And then we'd also suggest you consider going to our database. It's free, it's available online on our website, and take a look at some of the metrics that programs have done similar to yours that you might be able to pull from if you haven't thought about doing that in the past. We'll say when we've looked at metrics, and we started putting together about 15, 16 metrics that we saw throughout the last 10 years of Examples of Excelencia, we found a couple of common threads of metrics that seem to resonate a little bit more than others when we looked at programs over that 10-year period. And while sometimes it seems a little trite to say it, I think it's important to just point out that looking at data over time, if you've been able to track your students or those you're serving over time, whether it's 1 to 2 years, maybe it's 5, 10 years, maybe it's semester by semester, but looking at data over time tells a more brings a more thoughtful picture of what you're doing to those who are reading your work. If you look at comparison groups, are there those that were able to participate in your program and others that weren't? Or students who took similar courses, for example, that you might be able to compare what they've been doing with others. Some of the programs we've seen over time really focus on the process of the program and what's taken place to get students to the ultimate goal of completion, whether it's a course or graduation. And some we have had programs that have focused a great deal on the outcomes themselves, GPA or actual completion of a degree. And so, you know, it should, as long as it's consistent with what your program is doing, they both have value and appeal, and looking at what you're doing, figuring out which is the most appropriate for your effort is really important. And we're going to give you some examples in a couple of minutes of each of these so you can consider. And then I think, as we said before, you know, are you disaggregating your data so that, you know, amongst all you serve, Latinos and other students are doing as well as or better than others? It's that added intentionality in your metrics that we're paying attention to, and want to make sure that as we tell your story nationally, that we're able to capture the kinds of metrics that people outside of your program area, your institution, and your community can resonate with.
Thanks, Deborah. Now we're going to take a look at the 5 issue areas and the common metrics that we found in each one. So when we looked at the profiles of finalists and examples, we found that, as Deborah said, they use some of the similar metrics to tell their story. Programs are categorized in 5 different issue areas: academic, access, transfer, retention, and support services. And so these issue areas are used by Excelencia to help describe the program type. And we also use it to categorize the finalists and examples in our Going What Works database. Many programs can be described by multiple issue areas, but for your profile, we ask that you select the one that best describes your program. When reviewing, Excelencia staff reads the profiles based on the issue area that you select. But sometimes, just to better accommodate programs and to make sure there's better alignment within your profile, we may change the issue area just to reflect the information that you're giving us. So this first issue area is academic programs. So these are programs that focus on specific subjects, disciplines, or coursework. So an example of this could be things like STEM programs, or a department of a specific subject, excuse me. So something like a math department or engineering or things like that. Here we found that these programs measure the success by GPA in the field's coursework, increase in scores of pre and post tests, and the number of students who actually enter the field they studied in. The next issue area is access. Programs that describe themselves as access are programs that try to help students prepare for and enroll in institutions of higher education. Many of the programs we see here are those at the CBO level, as well as programs that work with students in high school. When telling their story, they focus on college going rates and how many of their students were able to enroll in college, as well as college readiness. They showed evidence that their students were prepared for college through things such as completion of academic courses, improvement in pre and post tests, as well as the percent of students that participated in the support services that they provided. Transfer programs are programs that focus on supporting students as they work towards transferring, typically from two-year to four-year institutions. We usually find this in the associate category. Some of the metrics that these programs use include transfer rate, of course, completion rate, as well as continuation rates, or the percent of graduates that continue their education after they've left the institution. Our fourth issue area is retention. Retention programs ensure that students remain enrolled at an institution and persist through their graduation. They use retention or persistence rates, usually shown as semester to semester or fall to fall. So institutions retain students and students persist through higher education or college. And then these programs also looked at or described their dropout rate, or the percent of students that stopped out or did not return to the institution. And our final issue area is support services. Support services provide students with various services such as tutoring, writing centers, advising, counseling, and other things to support them as they navigate the higher education process. These programs aren't necessarily tied to one specific program or field, and they tend to measure their success by participation rates and the percent of students that actually use their program services, as well as student performance through coursework GPA and completion rates, and whether or not students transferred. Whether or not they transferred or went to a grad school, or if the students graduated. So that's kind of a description of completion rates. So those are the 5 issue areas. At this time, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Alex Cho. As we've mentioned earlier, he's the Vice President for Government Relations at NCEP. Alex served on the 2015 selection committee, and he'll return for the 2016 committee. And he's gonna share with us some of his perspective when he reviews profiles. Alex?
Thank you, Andres. So as our good colleagues, Andres and Deborah have shared, my name is Alex Cho, and I have the distinct privilege of sharing some of my insights as a selection committee member, and I hope to do this so that you can help develop a stronger profile for when you apply here in 2016. So what I'd like to do is actually spend just a little bit of time trying to demystify the process a little bit and try to provide some practical advice that can help better position you within the selection process. As you can imagine, it's this incredible challenge for a group of professionals to read all of these incredibly compelling stories and try to just identify just a handful of them for national promotion. So with that said, let me peel back the curtain a little bit on the selection process and really begin with some very broad insights that I hope can be helpful. The very first thing you should know is that the selection committee is actually a pretty unique group of individuals. They come from institutions from all over the country. We have strong representation from more policy-centric organizations, and then we have really broad representation from not-for-profit organizations. Given that we are all very and sincerely drawn to Excelencia's mission, as you can imagine, we are largely biased towards impact. I should say that I was, through my own personal experience, I was actually very impressed at how few other biases permeated the discussions. And what I mean by that is that regardless if you're an urban or rural organization, if you're a well-established entity that's been around for decades, or if on the other hand you're a scrappy startup that is just starting their work, if you serve thousands of students or if you serve hundreds of students or less, I genuinely believed that the selection committee was remarkably fair-minded and very holistic in their review. So in this regard, everything's, all things really are relative. And I want to share that because the story element of the review process is actually very, very important. As Deborah intimated earlier, we don't know you at all. So by all means, teach us about who you are, what your core values are, and what makes you so deeply valued by your community. So in short, really embrace who you are, lead with what makes you unique and special, and in this, by all means, it's a good thing to be memorable. The second thing I really want to point out is that by the time the profiles arrive to the selection committee, they are all very, very strong. And I hope I'm not speaking out of school here, but the difference between the eventual example that is put forward and let's say even the lowest ranked profile in that same category is actually remarkably small. As such, the selection committee has to work really, really hard to differentiate between all of these incredibly successful programs, and therefore the details get amplified quite a bit. So we are deeply sympathetic to your challenge. We know that the word limits impose some very real restrictions in trying to reveal yourself. So be sure that you reveal the aspects of your program really with great intentionality. If you're vague or if you expect reviewers to infer things that cannot directly be cited in the actual profile, you're missing your opportunity to make your best case. Now, the last observation I want to make is that given the national nature of the Examples of Excelencia program, and given the kind of makeup of the selection committee, what I observed was that when two or more applicants were largely equal, we often turned to one topic as a potential tiebreaker. And we openly discussed kind of this basic question. To what extent would the applicant's strategy or model be scaled up or replicated in other communities, right? So in order to answer that question, it actually requires a great deal of debate. So you can actually help advocate for yourself by weaving in kind of this theme of broader applicability of your program throughout your narrative. So don't just limit it in the budget section, right? I mean, really make a very strong, compelling case. If you know that your program works, how likely is it that it can be grown both in your community, or how likely is it that it could be adopted by other communities that share your needs? The further you can go in answering those questions, the easier you make it for the selection committee to really promote you. Now, the last observation I want to make before moving into some kind of less abstract recommendations is that as committee members, we all review the profiles independently, and then we convene as a group and we discuss, we share our collective insights, we correct one another on things that we might have missed, and of course, we debate the selection in great detail. So the basic truth is this: someone on the selection committee is going to fall in love with your program, and he's going to go out of their way to champion your profile kind of during this committee debate. So as you're writing your profile and as you're reviewing your profile once it's in draft form, ask yourself, am I including all of the necessary aspects that would help someone advocate for me as effectively as possible? And if you're not quite sure what the answer is, go back and try to make a more persuasive case with that audience in mind. Okay, so if we can move on to the next slide, let me go ahead and make some very specific recommendations that I think can be helpful to you all in the short term. First and foremost, recognize that this is not a purely academic exercise. It is absolutely okay to use persuasive language to tell a compelling story. Reviewers, like I said, we're a sympathetic bunch, so we can definitely overcome a very dry narrative, but we believe that speaking to both kind of the logical and the emotional components of your story is a very, very, very good thing. So So focus on being compelling. Secondly, be thoughtful about how you frame data or the metrics components in your profile. And what I mean by that is is that a number or a statistic in absolute isolation can prompt questions that we as reviewers simply cannot answer very well, right? We only have a very small profile on you. So whenever we're confronted by this, we essentially put on our data detective hats and we try to solve a mystery. And to be perfectly honest, that's rarely a good thing, right? Make this as simple as possible for the reviewers by ensuring that every time you present your data, you're ensuring that there's sufficient context for us to truly understand and appreciate the magnitude of what you've accomplished. So context is really, really, really important, even more so than just presenting a stream of numbers. Lastly, and perhaps this is the easiest thing you could possibly do to better position yourself during the review process, is Excelencia, through this webinar, has gone to great lengths to illustrate what components exist in successful profiles. I would urge you to use this kind of moment of transparency to your advantage and use the questions that they embedded throughout this PowerPoint and webinar to create kind of a reviewer's rubric or checklist. So once you've developed your first draft of the profile, I would find a critical friend. And what I mean by that is someone who's close enough to you that they're willing to provide some really, really honest feedback. Ask them to review your draft profile against those very specific questions that Excelencia shared earlier. And based on their responses, based on their feedback, revise as necessary, and you will have made a huge leap forward in the quality of your draft for submission. So with that, I will turn it back over to my colleagues, and I understand we'll have some time for some discussion. So thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Alex. Right before we get into the questions, I do want to mention this different type of support that we try to provide our programs. So you can actually contact me directly if you have any questions about the process or the profiles. My number is on the screen, as well as my email address. In the off chance that you don't get a hold of me, you can, and you need an answer rather quickly, you can visit our website at excelencia.org/examples-tools. Here you'll find a recording of our last webinar, How Excelencia Finds Examples. And we'll also be posting the recording of this webinar sometime this week. And we'll also have a copy of the slides up as well. You can also find our completion guide that includes answers to our frequently asked questions, some sample profiles to look over, common metrics to consider, and a list of the resources we mentioned earlier to help you tell your story using data. And finally, if you want to look for examples of programs that we recognized before, as Deborah mentioned, you can go to the Growing Works database and look for samples or look at examples of other programs that are serving Latino students. So we're going to open up now for questions. Morgan Taylor, a research analyst here at Excelencia, is kind enough to track questions for us. So again, if you have questions, please use the control panel on the right of your screen where it says questions. Morgan, what's the first question we have for today?
The first question is, if I select one issue area, will I be penalized if the staff or selection committee feels that my program should be described as another issue area?
Yeah, no, there'll be no, we don't penalize any program for the issue area they choose. And we don't limit the numbers at all by issue area. We're just trying to catalog it so we have a better understanding of what it is and when we talk about it externally. So, you should pick the issue area that makes the most sense to you, understanding that it might be a little variant from what you might choose. And we will read it with that context in mind. And if we think there's something that's incredibly variant about that, we might let you know, but we won't penalize you for that.
Okay, great. The next question is, can I include links to our annual report? Or if I use the entire character limit, can I provide additional documentation via email?
Well, the point of the character limit is to just try to make sure that your profile remains succinct and you try to get the key points or the most important details of your program Sometimes maybe if we need more information from you, we may reach out, or if the selection committee is asking about something else, we may reach out to you, but we typically don't look at external links or ask you to submit anything in addition to your profile.
Right. It's kind of wouldn't quite be fair to have detailed from some and not from others. We're trying to make it standard, so we probably wouldn't look at it.
Okay. The next question is there a recommended time frame that a program should be in existence to demonstrate strengths? In other words, is a newer program at a disadvantage?
So typically we're looking for programs that have been around probably about 3 years or so or more. Newer programs are probably a little bit more at a disadvantage because you have less evidence of effectiveness. Having said that, we do have a honorable mention category where in the past we've seen really strong programs that in their first year or two have had really strong evidence of effectiveness, and we think has a lot of potential. So I would encourage you, if you think that your program is less than 3 years old, but has some strong early indicators of success, that you consider submitting your profile. And even if it might not be as competitive as something that's been around 3 years or more, it could be recognized still with honorable mention.
Can an organization submit separate program components for nomination individually, or is there only one nomination allowed per organization?
Well, as long as it's a central program, it would just be that one profile. So I think it's a little different if you just kind of if you submit separate things for each part of your program, if it's an overall kind of thing. So I think it'd be best to just tell us the different services that you provide your students and how overall those services are effective for the students that you're serving.
So let me add a little bit more to that. I do think if you're, for example, a community-based organization and you have more than one program in place, you should feel comfortable in submitting both programs if you feel they're appropriate and relevant. And as we're an institution of higher education, we can accept more than one program from an institution of higher education. I think the distinction Andres made, which is appropriate, is if there are subcomponents within an existing program, are they different enough, and do you have enough evidence of effectiveness to show their success on their own merit? And I think that's the distinction. This can be a challenge for some programs that are very holistic in nature and have lots of subcomponent subprograms within one big program. It can often be challenging to identify what is the evidence of effectiveness there. So you might want to consider maybe a smaller program or a subset as the submission.
If we partner with community-based organizations in a program that is not exclusively our program, would we be penalized for a proposal not exclusively ours?
No, you wouldn't be penalized. What we'd ask is to identify which is the organization that would be formally recognized. So I will say we've had in the past programs run by community-based organizations, but housed at an institution of higher education. And as long as you identify who is the main host partner, that will help us categorize it either as a CBO or an institution of higher education. In fact, we love seeing collaboration and partnership, especially if you're able to show evidence of effectiveness based on that partnership. So there is not a penalty. I think we do ask for clarity, though, to make sure we know the entity that's submitting formally.
I believe this next question is for Mr. Cho. Does the review committee supplement an application by looking at their website? So are they going to check out the website, Facebook, Twitter, etc.?
I would say only under extreme duress. and what I mean by that is genuinely, I think we might have done that once last year, and that was only under like extraordinary circumstances. We've tried to be really, really as fair as possible in ensuring that the conclusions that we draw to inform our recommendations to Excelencia are firmly cited in materials that are included as part of the profile. So assuming that a reader is going, or a reviewer is going to, your Twitter feed or jump over to your website, or to follow links to, let's say a larger evaluation report, I would urge against making that assumption.
Next question is, my program does not fall into a traditionally academic subject, and the goal is to prepare students for jobs. Does this disqualify my program from the academic designation?
I don't know that it disqualifies you. If it's related to a career field, I think that still fits into the same category. And so it would not be disqualified from that at all. You might also want to think about whether it helps in the student services or support area. But if it's more of a program, a formal program, even if it's one of a career area, it's certainly, you're welcome to identify it in there in the issue academic program. And there is no disqualification. In the past, we have honored programs that have focused on preparing students for the workforce and for careers.
I have another question for Mr. Cho. How much does your own experience influence the decision to choose one program over another?
I would say actually very little. I found that the composition of the selection committee was as such that, for example, my own expertise is probably more on the college preparation side. So having so many experts on, let's say, the college completion side, as an example, helped supplement my own thinking as we discussed and reviewed the various profiles that we had in place. So with that said, I'm being very genuine here. I really found the group to be incredibly fair-minded and very holistic in just evaluating each of the profiles on their own merits relative to their own goals. And if you were successful there, then you had a really, really strong chance of moving forward.
Do you allow photographs as part of the profile?
There's no real place to put photographs within the profile. We actually encourage people to, so there's actually a time limit when you're filling out the form, and we encourage people to use Microsoft Word to fill out the sections and then copy and paste your responses within the form. But there's no way to include pictures or anything like that. And that kind of goes along the lines of external links and things.
Yeah. You can use any word processor, not just
Right.
Microsoft Word, but.
How many winners or finalists per category are there?
Well, finalists, we typically do about maybe 4 to 5. And of those 4 and 5, there's one example. So I know last year we had 20 examples finalists, and 4 of those finalists were the examples in their category. So just keep in mind there's one example within each category, but there's multiple finalists in each category.
Okay, and then updated data for my program will not be available until after the profile deadline. Can I provide updates after the deadline has passed?
Yeah, if you just reach out to me and let me know that you have some updated information on your profile, we'll be happy to accept your edits. Our review process within Excelencia is probably about 3 to 4 weeks or so before we get the finalists down. So if we're able to get that within that time frame, or as soon as possible, as soon as you get it, then it'd be something that we can consider for your profile.
Right. It's just if we haven't received it before it goes to the selection committee, then they'll receive what we have at the time we hand it forward. So we try to make sure that the selection committee gets the standard set of information to look across. We wouldn't go back to them if there have been changes there. They need time to take a look at everything, and we don't want to mess with that schedule. But you certainly have a little bit more time. We want to be as accommodating as possible. We know how critical it is to tell your story with data and with the information we've shared in advance.
Right.
Can I attend ALAS even if my program isn't selected?
Yeah, of course. ILS is open to everyone as long as you register. And I think it's very helpful for people that want to learn from other higher education professionals, find out what they're doing on their campuses or communities, and just kind of learning from each other, networking, and just taking away the different things that are happening now that programs are doing for Latino students.
Right. For Celebración de Excelencia, which is a wonderful event, that is free and open to the public. For ILAS workshop, there is a registration fee. So we can, if you'd like to follow up, we can give you more information about that. But we have found people who attend find it very useful for their efforts, and not the least of which is to find others of common cause who are committed to this effort as well.
If my program was a finalist in previous years, can I apply for examples again?
Yes. If you're a finalist, you can apply again. If you're an example, you cannot. So essentially, you can keep applying until you hit that example's recognition. A lot of the times, programs that were recognized as finalists in the past have probably changed a few components and are reaching more students now. And so they may feel like they have more to offer or more to show about what they're doing and how it's actually working within their community.
Yeah, and there is no guarantee that if you were a finalist in the past,
Right.
that you will be a finalist or the example in the subsequent year. The year brings in a new cache of really evidence-based programs for consideration. And every year it's always a challenge for our selection committee members to take a look at the wonderful work that's happening across the country. So you start from scratch pretty much every year that you resubmit. It's a great opportunity to strengthen your evidence of effectiveness, or maybe some other components that might have been strengthened more. And as I think Alex said, many of the finalists might have been the example in the subsequent year. So you should certainly keep that open.
Right.
Can an organization that targets parents and students as part of their mission, or does it have to just target students?
We've recognized plenty of programs that focus on parents specifically, or parents and students. So as long as your efforts or whatever practices you have in place has a positive outcome for Latino students, we don't see why not. I mean, if you're serving students through the parents, then that's a great way to do that.
We know parents are students' first teachers, right?
Right.
And they help support, especially the Latino community, that they help support a lot of the work. So I think, was it last year we had the PICE program?
Right.
That's parents involved in quality education. So for those who are asking the question, you might want to take a look at some of those honored in the past to get a sample of how it's looked.
What criteria must selection committee members meet in order to be on the selection committee?
So I'll answer that one. This is Deborah. Generally, we selected Excelencia. We select the members based on their work and experience with institutions, communities. We try to make sure there's diversity of representation. So some who focus on community colleges, some on graduate education, some on college prep. So we are very focused on making sure we have a balanced selection committee that is looking at different areas. We've never solicited. We've often based it on our partnership as an organization with others in the community and who are doing the work. And this year, for the first time, we've asked a previous program representative from an Example of Excelencia to actually serve as a reader and to be part of the selection committee as a way to expand the representation, but continue to show a diversity of perspectives so that those who are finalists are given strong consideration by those who are more knowledgeable in the space, but others who have different perspectives as well.
Okay, and we have one final question here. Is there any weight given to the individual that serves as a nominator?
In terms of who's nominating the program, no. The only reason we may look at who's nominating is because we want to reach out to them, thank them for nominating, or invite them to the fall events. But in terms of if it's, even if it's the President of the United States, it's not going to affect the the likelihood that a program will be selected as a finalist or an example?
Well, I don't know about that one. No, no, I'm kidding. No, we actually separate them. The nominator could be actually the nominated as well. And the selection committee doesn't know who's nominated any of the programs. So we keep that separate, in part because we want to make sure that the focus is actually on the profile itself and the practices that are in place.
And so if your program has not been nominated, feel free to nominate your own program. We don't hold you against that.
We don't hold that against you.
We don't hold that against you, right?
And it appears that that was our final question.
Okay. Well, if anyone else has any additional questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. My email and my phone number is on the screen. I want to thank Alex Cho for joining us today and providing his insight. As I mentioned earlier, slides will be available on the website as well as a recording later this week. And so thank you everyone for attending. We look forward to receiving your nominations and profiles for the 2016 Examples of Excelencia.